welcome to another episode of One Health Talks. And here we have Patrick Keys, and we're going to ask him a couple of questions where he talks about his background and his discipline, and also how that relates to systems thinking as well. So welcome, Patrick. You can just talk a bit about your background, please.
Oh, okay, sure. So again, I'm Dr. Patrick Keys. I'm the lead scientist at the School of Global Environmental Sustainability at Colorado State University. And in that capacity, I sort of do a whole lot of things. I'm primarily a research scientist. So primarily I'm asking and answering questions. And my research group is loosely called the Anthropocene Dynamics group. And in that group, we do a lot of research around different kind of global sustainability challenges, everything from thinking about Earth system boundaries, like the planetary boundaries, to systems questions, kind of complex future-oriented systems questions. We look at sea level rise, we look at climate change impacts and adaptation, lots of different things. But kind of throughout, a common thread throughout all of that is a very clear systems perspective, especially taking into consideration surprises, weak signals, that sort of thing, and what are the quantitative and qualitative ways that we can kind of probe those ideas and sort of inspect those features of systems.
Oh, great, thank you. That's pretty cool and complex because there's a lot of things that I didn't understand, but I guess we'll dive a bit deeper into that. So
yeah, sorry, it was probably riddled with jargon.
So here comes the next question. So how did you become a systems thinker? You know, how did that relate?
That's a really good question. And I don't know, it's hard for me to think of a time when I wasn't a systems thinker.
Okay.
But I can think of a few like inflection points along sort of my personal intellectual career, I guess you could say. There was this one thing in undergrad, so that during my undergraduate education, I had an opportunity to spend a month doing sort of intensive experiential study program in Ecuador. And one of the experiences was going into the Ecuadorian Amazon. And we did a lot of kind of biology. It was a biology oriented program, but we also did this sort of role play game where we took different perspectives of organizations, institutions within the Amazon basin in Ecuador, everything from oil companies to the Ecuadorian government to NGOs, that sort of thing. And we had a dialogue that, and sort of our ability to speak was kind of governed by or regulated by how much power we had, social, political power. And I was the indigenous community in the Amazon, that's what I was representing. And I had no power to speak in that forum. Even if I was, standing up or standing on the table, nobody would pay attention to me because they were trying to represent the power dynamics realistically. And that really drove home sort of the systemic issues in that particular part of the world. But it illustrated how important that dimension of our social relations, our power in terms of systems, but it also just underlined how complex a problem can be, even if it seems like there's a right answer, or it seems like obviously that group should have more of a platform. Just because we know that might be the reality doesn't mean that solves the systemic problem for us. So that was probably a key turning point for me, thinking about like, oh, the things that I think I know are sort of stood on their head a bit.
Okay, great. So just in that same logic, why is systems thinking therefore important for you? I mean, maybe based on your work or your life in general, does it play a role in these areas as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is two kids, raising kids in general. And there's this quote where it says, making a sandwich is simple, building a rocket is complicated, but raising a child is complex. And the complex and complicated are different. Like if we had all the stuff and the instruction manual and a lot of people, we could build a rocket, right? We've been doing that for a long time.
Yes.
But unlike building something where it's just step by step procedural, a complex system is characterized by feedback, emergence, adaptive reaction and response. And that to me, before I had kids, I was like, I don't know what this means. Why is raising a child a complex system? But it absolutely is, because the whole system, it's changing. It's evolving with you as you're saying something in a micro context. As you say something, the child hears, responds, and speaks back. But then as they get older, the system also, there's like long-term memory of the system, right? So what you did and how you've been a parent or a caregiver for a long period of time actually matters. There's a long-term memory of the child system, of the family relationship system. And so that to me is a really using systems thinking, which is super nerdy in the context of being a parent, can be really useful for recognizing that like what you do now has a feedback, and it could be a short-term feedback, it could be a long-term feedback, but recognizing that helps to, I think it helps to clarify maybe patterns of behavior, and how to think about how can you be a good parent, how can you raise a successful child, emotionally, intellectually, all of those things. And systems thinking actually helps quite a bit there to understand how the relationships kick in. So,
oh, that's awesome. I think that also helps to sort of explain this to people who might have never understood what systems thinking is about, relating it to children and parenting. It really
absolutely
helps. Yeah.
as soon as you think about it that way, you're like, oh yeah, of course that's what you mean. I understand.
That's awesome. Thank you. So the last one is, how do you practice systems thinking? Like, how do you?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or how do you? Yes, I'll leave it as open as possible.
Yeah. So I mean, in my work, in my work, systems thinking is essential. I mean, a common feature of thinking about a system or a complex system is, where do you set a boundary, for example? Like, where do you decide this counts as part of the system, this doesn't count, for how we're going to characterize it or represent it? And so in my work, that's really important, because it tells you this is the kind of data, these are the areas of the Earth system, social systems, et cetera, that you need to look to understand the system. And so the boundary setting is critical in my work, as just one example. And then I guess I already brought up the example of my kind of personal life, in terms of family, how important systems thinking is. But I think that an aspect, like a feature of systems thinking that I'm very continually curious about, and I'm exploring that more and more in my work, is how do we, in these very fast changing systems that are characterized by the present day, so Anthropocene systems, these nonlinear changes, but synchronized nonlinear change across almost the entire Earth and social systems on our planet. What tools can we find to actually make sense of that? There might be empirical quantitative tools, but are there other tools that we need to be thinking about, qualitative tools, other ways of understanding these systems? Because I think the next 50 years, the next 20 years are going to require as many different ways of interpreting and navigating these systems as we can find. And so that's sort of one of the aspects of my work right now where systems thinking is critical, is identifying those strategies.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. So, I mean, we're going to be diving a lot more into systems thinking with the other interviews we're going to be having. But thank you so much,
Right.
Dr. Patrick Keys, for this wonderful moment with you and exploring a bit into your background and systems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.